Do the scientists who have faith in God believe that it is possible to communicate with God? I'll read it again, it's a bit long. Do the scientists who have faith in God believe that it is possible to communicate with God? So, there's a sad aspect of our culture these days. Not new, but getting more so, which is our absolute dependence on what quote-unquote science says as the truth. So I don't know whose question this is, but whoever's it is, I'm sure the question arose out of, well, if the scientists say you can communicate with God, it must be possible. I mean, that's the question, right? You have to first assume that they are scientists who believe in God, so that's the first part of the question. And then those who believe in God, do they think it's possible to communicate with God? The meaning of the question being, seems to me, if they do, then that means it's possible. And if they don't, that means it's not possible. And the questioner must be wondering where he or she wants to be on the do we believe it's possible to communicate with God spectrum based on whatever science says. Now here's the dilemma with that. Those of you who have been coming to satsang for a while or watching it online for a while, you know that I have a background in science. You know that I love science. And yet, the dilemma with science is that science is only as good as its tools are. Science relies on tools for giving it truth. So whether it's a microscope or a telescope, a scale, a measure, something that measures something, something that sees something, this is what science depends upon. Scientific truths don't come out of scientists sitting around and saying what's true. They're bringing in evidence, right? Evidence, data, proof. Okay, great. So what counts as evidence? It has to be something that their tools can show us. Which means it has to be something that can be weighed on a scale or could fit in a beaker or can be seen with a microscope or a telescope. And for all the things that are, science is great. The dilemma comes in all the things that you can't see with a microscope or telescope, the things that you can't stick on a slide to put in the microscope, the things that don't have a volume or an area, a length or a width, the things that you cannot easily determine whether it's a wave or a particle. Science doesn't have tools that deal with other things. And that's okay. We're not here to fault science. The dilemma comes when science tries to claim jurisdiction over things that its tools can't interact with. Because what that does then is deprive us of all of that, which is out of the realm of science. Things without a mass, without a volume, without a weight. Things invisible by either the naked eye or even your electron microscope. And that pertains, by the way, not only to God. When we start talking about it spiritually, sometimes it's hard for people, but it pertains to my favorite subject of love. Right? Get a scientist to prove to you that he or she loves his or her mother, or husband or wife or child, or anyone whom they say, yes, absolutely, I love them. You can't prove it by science. What's it weigh? What's it taste like? What's it sound like? What's it look like? Doesn't have a taste. Doesn't fall within any spectrum of light wave. But we know it exists. And so, communication with God exists. The tools of science don't prove it, but the tools of inner science, inner experience prove it. And whether it's the sages and the saints and the rishis, or whether it's the vast majority actually of people on earth, most people, if they can get beyond their ego-indoctrinated mind that says, oh, you're crazy, that didn't really happen, you're making that up. Most people actually have had an experience in their life through sight, through sound, through intuition, of communicating with the divine. And that doesn't mean that Lord Krishna in his divine blueness shows up with a flute on your doorstep. It could mean a formless presence. And if we haven't, don't worry. It'll happen. Not because science says it's possible, but because your heart opens to it. And if you still feel like you need science to first tell you it's possible and then you'll open your heart, ask yourself this. Is the earth round or flat? Okay, let's take a vote here, okay? All those in favor of earth is round, raise your hand. Great, unanimous. Anybody in favor of earth is flat? Okay, 1. So if we were in a science class today and we all wrote earth is round, we'd get the answer right. If you go on Google and you type in what shape is the earth, it's round. Okay, it may not be an exact perfect circle, but it's round. Another question. Does the sun revolve around the earth or the earth revolves around the sun? Okay, those in favor of sun revolving around the earth, raise your hand. 1, good. It's nice for a little bit of variety anyway. Those in favor of earth rotating around the sun, raise your hand. Great. Now, 2 examples. How do you know that? Because we've learned it. In some science class somewhere, we learned the earth is round. It and all the other planets in our solar system revolve around the sun. Well, a couple hundred years ago, a scientist was almost killed for suggesting that. If you had so much as suggested that the earth wasn't the center of the universe, this was blasphemy. Galileo was literally almost killed. And we thought the earth was flat. Why? Because that's what our instruments told us. Our telescopes were not yet good enough to give us the information that we now have that tells us, the earth is round. and it revolves around the sun. Great. But who knows whether 200 years from now there aren't going to be people sitting around laughing that 200 years ago we thought the earth was round and that we revolved around the sun. That's all based on our tools. The truth of science is based only on its tools. Now, who knows, maybe science will advance and we'll get tools that will show us the presence of God. But for us to deprive ourselves of that truth, just because the tools of science have not yet gotten there, not a good plan. Because we're the ones who get deprived. Who knows how old we'll be or whether we'll already be onto another body by the time science has a tool showing us you can communicate with God. Yes, God exists. We already know it doesn't have a tool to show us love. And we already know the not just presence, but the essential nature of love. And so don't worry about what the scientists say. Find your own truth. Go within. Be a tool rather than depending on the tools of science. Be a tool. Be a tool to channel the presence of God, the voice of God, the sight of God. Speak to God. Be that microphone to speak to God. You don't need science to finally develop a tool to tell you it's okay. You have the only tool you need, which is yourself and your love. So use that. Science will get there eventually. But why wait? Why lose even another moment?